Good evening and welcome to St. George's House in Conversation. We're delighted that so many of you could join us tonight, and especially pleased that so many of you are joining us from right across the world. It is, of course, no surprise, given that our guest is one of the most eminent women of our time. Dr. Jane Goodall is internationally renowned for her groundbreaking work with chimpanzees in the 1960s. But since then, her life has been devoted to care for our planet in its entirety. Jane is many things: an adventurer, a scientist, a woman who's spiritually attuned to nature. She is also a UN messenger for peace and founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, which empowers individuals to take informed and passionate action on behalf of the environment. Her Roots and Shoots program, which we'll talk about later, reaches right across the world. Uh, Jane, it is a great pleasure and privilege to welcome you back to St. George's House, albeit virtually. Now, I read recently that in a talk you gave to the Cambridge Union, you said to the students that the pandemic through which we are all currently living is entirely our own doing. What did you mean by that?
What I mean, Gary, and let me say how lovely it is to be talking to you, even though we wish it was in person, and it's because of this pandemic that we cannot be in person. And it's come about because of our absolute disrespect for the natural world and for animals in particular. So what's happened? We invade the animal's habitat and destroy it. We force some of them into closer contact with humans. We go in building dams and roads and extractive industries, and we hunt them, kill them, eat them. We capture them and traffic them around the world, or their body parts. We sell them in the Asian wildlife markets, the African bushmeat markets. We sell them as exotic pets in the ever-growing trade in exotic animals for pets. And if you take as an example a wildlife market in Asia or a wildlife market in Africa and probably in Latin America too, these conditions are terrible. The animals are stressed, they're confined in tiny spaces, and often the conditions are extremely unhygienic. And this is a perfect opportunity for a virus or a bacteria to jump over the species barrier from one of those animals to a human. And when this happens, this may create a new disease. In this case, a virus, COVID-19, created the pandemic that we're living through now, which unfortunately for us is highly contagious. And we have to add on to this list of horrors that we're perpetrating that are causing these so-called zoonotic diseases, factory farms, where billions of animals are confined in very small, cramped conditions, stressed and horribly cruel, but also creating a condition for a new zoonotic disease.
And, and Jane, what can we do, or what do you think we can do before these some temporary and some existential threats to our planet become irreversible?
Well, a lot of scientists believe that we've reached that point already, but luckily I'm not the only person out there who believes that we have a window of time when, if we get together and take action, we can start healing some of the harm and at least slowing down climate change. And as we emerge from this pandemic, which we will, then we're right in the middle of an even greater threat, which has been haunting us for years now, and that's climate change. And that, again, is due to our disrespect of the natural world. And the thing is, we're part of that natural world. We're not separate from it. We depend upon it. And yet some humans believe that, well, nature's that thing out there. We don't need nature. We do.
Well, and let's go back a little. I said in my introduction that your work with chimpanzees, of course, was groundbreaking and changed how we look at the natural world in many ways. But your affinity with nature began long before that, really in your childhood. And I'm sure people would be very interested to hear something about that, the genesis of your affinity with nature.
Yeah, people say what triggered it. Well, I was born with a love of animals. I was just born that way. And my mother tells the story. I was 1.5 years old, and she found I'd taken a whole handful of earthworms to bed with me. And she said, Jane, you were looking at them so intently as though you were wondering, how do they walk without legs? But she was a wonderful and supportive mother. She's up here behind me somewhere. Here she is. And so the famous story is when I went to stay on a farm in the country. I was 4 years old, and we lived in London, so not many animals there. It was really exciting. A proper farm where animals grazed out in the fields, not one of these factory farms. And I was given a job of collecting the hens' eggs. So there were about 6 or 8, I can't remember, different little houses where the hens slept at night, but also they had nest boxes around the edge where the hens were supposed to lay their eggs. So I would take my little basket, collect the eggs, and apparently I began asking everybody, but where is the hole on the hen big enough for the egg to come out? Because I couldn't see a hole like that. And nobody satisfied my curiosity. So I distinctly remember seeing a hen going into her hen house, and I crawled after her. I must have thought, she's going to lay an egg. I'll find out for myself. But it was a big mistake. She flew out with squawks of fear. So I must again have worked out, 4 years old, that no hen would lay an egg in that hen house. It was dangerous. Something was frightening in there. So I waited apparently for 4 hours in a hen house waiting for an egg, a hen to lay an egg. And I saw it happen. And my parents by then had called the police. They didn't know where I was. And yet, when my mother sees me rushing towards the house, instead of scolding me, she sat down to hear this wonderful story of how a hen lays an egg. And the reason I think that is so important, one, it points to the importance of having a supportive mother. But two, that was the making of a little scientist. Curiosity, asking questions, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake, not giving up, learning patience. And so a different kind of mother might have crushed that curiosity, and I might not have done what I've done. You know, it went on from there. I went on learning about animals. When I grew up, there was no television, it hadn't been invented. World War II was raging. I learned from books, and there weren't that many books about African animals, but my mother got as many books as she could find in the library. Couldn't afford new ones. I doubt they were made in the war. And but when I was 10 years old, I got this little book, Tarzan of the Apes. And that's when my dream began. I would grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them. And everybody.
And did your formal education help you or hinder you in this dream?
Well, there was absolutely no formal education back then in anything to do with studying animals. I mean, nobody was studying animals in the wild. There were a few people studying captive animals and zoos, for example. But, out in the wild, it just wasn't happening.
So the dream was to go to Africa, to spend time there, to learn more there, which is quite an adventure for a young woman at that time. And what would the alternative have been had you not done that?
You know, Gary, I don't know because I think that that's what I was meant to do. I can't imagine an alternative. I might not have got to Africa. I thought about Canada with its wolves and its bears and its wolverines, but it was Africa, probably because of Tarzan, that called to me. And everybody laughed at me. How would you get there? We didn't have money. It was far away, and I was just a girl. But my mother said, if you really want something like this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity. And then if you don't give up, you may find a way. Well, I did.
And when you found yourself in Africa, had you a team of people with you, or what was the setup? How did all that work?
Well, how it worked was, first of all, I got an invitation from a school friend to stay on her family farm. So I had to work to save up the money. I'd done a boring old secretarial course, but you couldn't save money in London. And I got a job. I'm talking to you from the house where I grew up. And I went to a hotel just around the corner and got a job as a waitress. I think it took about 5 months to save up enough money for a return fare to Africa. And it was by boat back then. You know, there weren't planes going back and forth. And there was one interesting thing that happened. That journey should have taken 2 weeks through the Suez Canal. But there was a war with Egypt. Suez Canal was closed. The boat had to go all the way down to the tip of Africa, Cape Town, which is the first place I set foot on African soil. And I loved it. It was exciting until I saw on the back of all the seats and the doors to the hotels these words in Afrikaans, "Slegsprong." And I said to the people who were hosting me for 2 days while the ship was in harbor, "What does this mean?" "It means white people only." I wasn't brought up that way. My grandfather was a congregational minister, and I wanted to leave. And it was much better when I got to Kenya, because that was on the very brink of independence, and there was no apartheid in Kenya.
And your first encounter with the chimpanzees, what was that like?
Well, that very first trip, I met Louis Leakey, and he's the one who was impressed by how much I knew, offered me the chance to go and live with chimpanzees and learn about them. Took him a year to get the money, but finally I got there, and it was part of the crumbling British Empire, one of the last outposts. It was Tanganyika in those days, and the British authorities refused to allow me to be alone. So I had to have a companion, they said. Who came with me? My mother. That same amazing mother volunteered to come and boosted my morale, because in the early days, chimpanzees took one look at this peculiar white ape and ran away. And it was very depressing. I only had money for 6 months. I mean, I had no degree. I hadn't been to college. I was straight out from England. I was just a girl. And fortunately, after 4 months, one of the chimpanzees had begun to lose his fear of me. He's up here behind me, the little one back there, David Greybeard. And I saw him using grass stems to fish for termites from their underground nest and break off leafy twigs and have to remove the leaves to make tools. At that time, it was thought humans and only humans used tools. We were actually defined as man, the tool user. So that observation brought in the National Geographic, that they would fund the research. The money ran out, and they sent a photographer and filmmaker, Hugo van Lauwijk, out to record the behavior, which I was learning more and more about as as more chimps began to accept my presence.
And did you ever feel threatened by the chimps? Did you ever feel in danger?
Yes, chimps are about 8 times stronger than me, maybe 10, the big males. And it was when they began to lose their fear of me, but hadn't yet accepted me as harmless. And they treated me like a carnivore, a predator. And they, when they're upright and they bristle their hair, they're about 4+ feet high. And they were charging all around me and screaming at me, or they were up in the branches above and shaking branches, some of which hit my head. And one of them charged past me and hit me. It was in the rain, that particular occasion, and I don't know if you've noticed, but in the rain, people rush across a street without really looking. And I think it's like that for the chimps. So they didn't like me and they wanted me to go away, but I pretended to be interested in digging little holes in the ground. I wasn't interested in them. And eventually they thought, oh, well, doesn't seem to be particularly dangerous and not going away. So they began to accept me.
And there's a wonderful moment in the National Geographic film where you talk about and show the chimpanzees making tools, using natural branches from trees to make tools. That must have been an extraordinary moment.
It was absolutely amazing. It was the turning point. And, from that moment on, and the thing is, Gary, that these chimpanzees in different parts of Africa, they use different objects for different purposes. And the young ones learn from the parents. That's one definition of culture, behavior passed from one generation to the next through observational learning. And at Gombe, they use different objects for maybe 9 different purposes. So, they really are tool users and tool makers.
And I think I'm right in saying that it was when chimpanzees became an endangered species that you felt you could best serve them by campaigning on their behalf rather than being with them. Is that right? That was when you became a campaigner.
Yeah, I'd been with the chimpanzees. I don't know, but anyway, it was so obvious they were so like us in so many ways. And science had shown that biologically they're most like us. So we share 98.6% of our DNA with them. And I, by that time, got a PhD because Louis Leakey made me go to Cambridge. I was the 8th person in Cambridge's history to get a PhD without a BA. And then I helped put together this conference in 1986. And by then there were 6 other field study sites. And during the 4-day conference with those scientists, we realized that everywhere across Africa, forests were disappearing, chimpanzee numbers were dropping. There was also some disturbing, secretly filmed video of the cruel training of circus chimps and the awful conditions in medical research labs. And, knowing that chimpanzees have personalities, minds, and emotions, they can live for 60 years. They have strong family bonds. Yeah, they're capable of violence and war, but also love, compassion, and altruism. And so when I realized what was happening to them, I went to that conference as a scientist, had my PhD by then, but I left as an activist. I just knew I had to do something, even though I didn't know what to do.
Right. And you became an activist, not just for chimpanzees, but really for the planet
Yeah.
in its entirety.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I did, well, okay, there was a long battle to get chimpanzees out of medical research, and they're out now because not because of the ethics, which is why I was fighting, but because it turned out nothing that was done to them was beneficial to human health. That's another story. So I went to Africa, find out firsthand more about, what was going on with the chimps. But although I learned a lot about the plight of the chimps, I also learned about the plight of so many Africans living around chimpanzee habitat, which is forest, and lack of good health and education facilities, crippling poverty, degradation of the land as human populations grew. And I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park where I did my research. We're still doing it, by the way, 60 years later. And it had been part of a forest belt right across equatorial Africa in 1960 and 1970. By 1990, Gombe was a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills, more people living there than the land could support, too poor to buy food from elsewhere, farmland overused and infertile. And that's when it hit me. If we don't help these people find ways of living without destroying their environment, we can't even try to save the chimpanzees, the forests, or anything else. So we began our Take Care or Takari program back in 1994, which is very holistic and is working in many different fields, including scholarships to keep girls in school beyond puberty, microcredit programs so that women can choose their own environmentally sustainable little small businesses, and we provide family planning, well received. And it's also, restoring fertility to the land, water management programs. The people have now become our partners in conservation. And that program is in 6 other African countries.
And of course, with campaigning and with trying to persuade the world that this is the right way to go, you're dealing with people at a very high level. But one of the areas you have to work with are the corporations. And it must be extremely difficult to persuade people whose bottom line is profit that all this needs to change. The fossil fuel industry, the oil industry, all of these. It must feel like an uphill struggle from day to day.
Yes, and Gary, the whole thing is there's this crazy idea that we can have unlimited global development on a planet with finite natural resources. In some places, we're using up those resources faster than nature can replenish them. And we're on a planet with a growing population of not only humans, but our livestock. And as I've said, in some places, we're using up these resources too fast. Right now, there are 7.8, is the latest I saw, 7.8 billion of us. In 2050, that's predicted to be closer to 10 billion. And if we carry on with business as usual, as some of these corporations and governments want, what's going to happen? Because, a really important thing we must do is alleviate poverty. Because if you're really poor, you do cut down those last trees. If you've got to survive, and if you're in an urban area, you buy the cheapest junk food. You can't afford to say, did it harm the environment? Was it cruel to animals? Whether inequitable wages, which is why it's cheap. You have to live. But as whole nations come out of poverty, which is really important, of course they want to emulate the unsustainable lifestyles of millions of others that we're trying to reduce, because our footprint is too environmentally heavy for the future. So if we care about the future, and we do care about our children, our grandchildren, and theirs, but sometimes you wouldn't think it.
But it is of course a struggle, and I'm trying to imagine you've got access to people at the very highest level. You speak to prime ministers, presidents, etc., chief executives. Um, do you ever feel that it's lip service? People agree with you and say, "Of course it's terrible. We'll do what we can," and then off they go to the next shareholders meeting.
Well, of course, sometimes it's like that without question. But, I found the only way when you meet people like that, it's no good arguing with them. It's no good pointing fingers. It's no good telling them they're bad. You've got to get in the heart. I think people must change from within. And how do you get in the heart of these people? Well, I tell stories. And sometimes a story you don't even know at the time that it really went home. You find out later. And I found also that young people can change their parents. And it's much easier to help a young person to understand the realities of our life and our future if we don't change. And then use them. Well, I don't use them, but they automatically want to change their parents.
And I think when you mention young people, of course, that makes me think here at St. George's House of the Roots and Shoots program. Now, some of our audience tonight will know about it and some won't. So perhaps you would say a little bit about the origins of that and how it works and what the reach of the Roots and Shoots program is.
Yes. And it's one of my big passions. It sort of keeps me going. And it began in 1991 in Tanzania with 12 high school students who came to see me because they were worried about the poaching in their national parks. Why wasn't the government taking action? They were worried about street children with no homes, the cruel treatment of stray dogs, the illegal dynamite fishing destroying the coral reefs. And so I got the 12 to go and find friends in their 8 schools. We had a big meeting. And that's when Roots and Shoots was born. And we decided that there would be groups, clubs, they call them. It would be clubs the main message would be every single one of us, all of us, everyone listening now to us, including you and me, every day we live, we make some impact on the planet, and we can choose what sort of impact we make, unless, as I say, we're living in crippling poverty. And we decided that because in the rainforest, I learned how everything is interconnected and every little species has a role to play in this glorious tapestry of life, that each Roots and Shoots club would choose 3 projects, one to help people, one to help animals, and one to help the environment, because they're all so interrelated. So from that little beginning in 1991, coming up to our 30th anniversary, we now have programs in 68 countries, and it's growing all the time. And there are groups in countries that we haven't even heard about until suddenly you find there's a little group in the middle of a rainforest in Latin America somewhere. And I would say there are thousands of groups, and we have members from preschool, kindergarten, university, everything in between. And they are changing the world as we speak. And I find it's my greatest reason for hope, because young people, when they understand the problems, when we listen to them, and when we empower them to take action, they discuss, they use this amazing intellect that we have, makes us more different from other animals than anything else, which makes it more absurd that we're destroying our only home. But the young people, they discuss what they care about, and they get to choose. Some of them choose to work with plastic. Some of them choose to work with palm oil. Some of them want to work with animal welfare or trafficking. And these meetings, I think we had 6 at St. George's House, didn't we? At 6. And
Yep.
these are young people of 18, between 18 and 24. And they come from 30 or so different countries, because one of the things that's happening with Roots and Shoots is they're learning that much more important than the color of your skin, your culture, your religion, the food you eat, the clothes you wear, is the fact we're all human beings. And you've seen with your own eyes, Gary, how young people from different countries can unite over a shared passion about single-use plastic. And those groups that you met, those little interest groups, they're still working, and they're making a difference, and they're gathering others in, changing adults. I mean, it's very exciting. My biggest reason for hope.
And I think one of the most impressive things about it is that it's all self-financing. They raise the resources. They make it work throughout the various countries of the world.
Yes,
So you've got an army of activists, really, internationally.
yes, that's right. And my dream is a critical mass of young people who understand, yes, we need money to live. It goes wrong when we live for money. And they all understanding what's so important, that as we come out of COVID-19, it was like a wake-up call. We
Yeah.
must get together and form a new relationship with the natural world and animals. We must somehow create a more sustainable, greener economy. We've got to stop equating success simply with getting money, getting power, and think about success as a successful life, compassion, love, caring about others, making the world a better place.
And what I've read, Jane, in your books, poverty, eradicating poverty, and of course driving towards equality seems to be at the heart of everything. Would that be right?
Yes, I think so. And one of the lovely things I've found when I talk to various people at the St. George's gatherings was, one and all, that the people from Africa or India with dark skins and from Eastern Europe, they had felt discriminated against, but they said the moment they met Roots and Shoots group like that, they felt completely that they were one, that they were family. And that's today in the divisive world we're in, that probably is one of the most important things.
And do they, when the groups are set up in the various countries, do they have longevity? Is it simply project by project and then they go on to the rest of their lives? Or do they stay with the initiative all the way through?
Well, it varies. We really push for continuity when a group is formed. We say, you've got to think now about handing on when you leave school or whatever. But many, many, many have gone from various levels of school to university, taking the program with them. They go to a school in another country and they start Roots and Shoots there. And the best of all, we have all these what I call alumni been through the program, and somehow something about Roots and Shoots, they retain the values that they gained during their membership of Roots and Shoots.
Right.
The environment minister in DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, stands up strong against some of the government ministers. And he was in Roots and Shoots in primary school, as was the Minister of Environment in Tanzania. And he stood up against the president's decision to build a dam in a World Heritage Site. And, a lot of people are sent to prison when they speak out like that. He lost his job, luckily not his life.
Right. And how, education is so important, and we've spoken about this before, but how do you influence the education system to take this on board, to try and make it a core part of the curriculum, to teach kids that this is what needs to happen if our planet is to survive?
Well, we try. And in the UK, it was in the time of, I think it was, I can't remember which government it was now, but, our young woman who's in charge of Roots and Shoots UK, and oddly, the UAE as well, it's a kind of odd combination, Tara Golshan. She went to see, it was Tony Blair's wife, that's right, Tony Blair's wife. And she got really excited about it. She introduced them to the education ministry. And that then Roots and Shoots was labeled as a program that the school teachers who are so overworked could have as part of the curriculum. And so that we're now in 1,700 schools across the UK. And it's pretty fantastic. We've managed to get into education systems in some countries, not in others. We get into individual school education. It really does vary. I mean, it's very much a grassroots program. It varies depending on the country, the poverty of the group concerned, the religion that makes quite a difference, and the government. So you have to tread very carefully in some countries so that your young people aren't labeled as a cult or get thrown into prison or the program shut down.
Of course, of course. And has that happened anywhere to date?
We haven't been shut down yet,
Right.
which I think is pretty amazing.
It is. It is. And are there countries you won't deal with on principle?
No, because you may not approve of the government in power at the time, but that doesn't influence, that has no bearing on the young people. I want to help the young people. And I had this wonderful lesson from this amazing mother of mine. In the war, growing up in the war, we hated the Germans. The sound of a German voice made your heart beat. We hated the Nazis. We hated Hitler and Goering and, all of those people. When the war was over, my uncle was in one of the sections of Germany that was ruled by the British. It was divided into four. And he contacted Mum, this uncle, and said there's a family that wants somebody to teach their children good English. Mum let me go because she told me later, she said, I wanted you to understand that just because of the Nazis and Hitler doesn't mean Germans are bad people. And that was an amazing lesson. I was 18 at the time. And, I think that wisdom was pretty amazing. That's
Yeah.
where we go.
But your mother sounds like an absolutely remarkable woman, so it's no surprise that you are remarkable too. Jane, I was just reading, I think yesterday, maybe even today, in Canada, uh, the Canadian Parliament is debating an act
Yeah,
which, if it gets passed, will be known as the Jane Goodall Act.
that's right. It's to prevent the import of ivory, rhino horns, and things like that. And it's to protect captive animals to make sure that they have the best conditions. The same senator, Senator Sinclair, already passed a bill which I supported in 91 to not 91, 2019, to ban any further import of whales and dolphins into aquariums. And this is to prevent the importation of any more great apes and elephants, with provision for other animals in the future, unless it's for their own good, like if they're orphans or something,
Yeah.
and protect them in zoos.
And how did that come about? What was the process that brought you to that point where a senator is prepared to put an act before Parliament?
Well, Gary, I know maybe you can answer that more than me, but it was the chimpanzees that helped me to change science's attitude towards animals. When I went to Cambridge, I hadn't been to college. I was doing a PhD. I was very nervous. And I was, can you imagine how I felt when these erudite professors told me I'd done everything wrong? Chimps should have had numbers, not names. That was scientific. I couldn't talk about personality, mind, or emotion. Those were unique to us. There was a difference in kind between us and the rest of the animals. We were on a pinnacle, separated from all the others by an unbridgeable chasm. And because the chimps turn out to be so like us biologically and behaviorally, kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another, long-term bonds between mothers and offspring lasting through life, long period of childhood learning, because they do have a lot to learn like our kids. And, you know, with all this altruism that you see with an adult male adopting an orphan, even though he's not related by blood, uh, then science had to come out of this reductionist way of thinking. And that opened the floodgate. So, we now know animals so intelligent, much more than people used to think. And I would love everybody who's listening to see a film that's getting prizes all around the world now. It's brand new. It's called My Octopus Teacher. So who would have thought that octopus could reach out to this man like David Greybeard reached out to me? And, the intelligence of birds. We used to talk about a bird brain. Crows can do some tasks faster than a 7-year-old human child, an average human child. And the apes and the elephants and the whales and the dolphins, they're so much more intelligent than we used to think. And perhaps even more important, they're all sentient. They can feel, they know fear and pain. Every animal in our factory farms is a personality, is a sentient being. Every animal that we traffic around the world, the wildlife markets, is a sentient being. That's why we have to change if we want to truly stand up and be proud of being human beings.
Jane, thank you. I think the film The Octopus Teacher, of course, is one that people should look at. And people might also want to see the film of your life, which is also on Netflix, I believe. That must have been an interesting experience seeing that come together.
Well, yes, it was. I mean, there are two. There's one done by the Geographic called Jane, and another one done sort of under Geographic auspices called, I think it's Jane the Hope, something like that. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of, there's two Janes, Gary. There's the Jane out there that people make films about, and, you know, all that sort of thing. And they tell me I'm an icon and stuff. And there's this Jane sitting here where I grew up talking to you, who knows I'm just Jane, just another human being. But the great thing is that human beings have an indomitable spirit. And I've met people, amazing people around the world. There's a man in Canada, born with no arms and no legs. And he's got one little thing like a foot and two little stumps this big, like a wrist, coming from here and here. He goes around on a skateboard. He jumps up on a sofa beside you, and you look into his face. You're looking into somebody with so much love of life, so much intelligence shining out of him. And the third time I met him, I said, Chris Koch is his name. I said, Chris, has anybody talked to you about prosthetic limbs? He said, yes, they have, and it probably would work. But he said, I've got to thinking that maybe I was put together like this for some reason, so I better stay as I am. And then this little twinkle came into his eye, but he said, I might take them up on it when I decide to climb Mount Everest.
Terrific. Jane, I know that when we're not grounded with COVID-19, you travel the world visiting projects, persuading people, encouraging people. I had hoped that when you were grounded in Bournemouth, you might be a little less busy, but when I spoke to you, you're busier than ever. I also know that your family time is very important to you, and we are about to encroach on that, and I'm not going to do that. You said a moment ago that you're just a human being, and of course you are, but you are a very special human being, and we're very grateful to you for taking the time to speak to us and be with us virtually tonight. And I hope it won't be too long until we are here together in person in the Vicar's Hall. It's been a great pleasure, and thank you to all of you who have tuned in to listen to this conversation. I hope you'll visit the websites. Just Google the Jane Goodall Institute and Roots and Shoots, and that will take you to this wonderful world that Jane and her team have created and the wonderful work that they're doing. For now, it only remains for me to say thank you, one and all. Keep safe, keep well, and good night.